Imagine for a moment that you are standing in just a completely barren valley.
Right.
There are no cultivated fields to sort of soften the ground beneath your feet. The sun is beating down with this relentless, suffocating heat.
The kind of heat that instantly pulls the moisture right out of your skin.
Exactly. And there is no hidden spring announcing itself with the sound of rushing water. There are no people, no tents, like no distant fires to promise you companionship or protection.
Nothing but rock and sand.
Yeah. And you are holding a nursing infant. You have a small leather pouch of dates, a single water skin that is already feeling alarmingly light, and you're just standing there.
Just watching your soul protector walk away.
Right, your only tie to human society and safety, just walking away into the distance. The silence settling over the valley is absolute.
It's terrifying.
It really is. You are armed with absolutely nothing but this whispered promise that you have not been abandoned.
Which is, it is the absolute definition of a wilderness crisis. It's an environment that offers zero visible welcome, zero physical infrastructure, and to the naked eye at least, zero visible hope.
Yeah.
It is a space designed to completely strip away every single human illusion of control.
And that profound, terrifying vulnerability is exactly where we are dropping you today. And our guide for this deep dive today is a really remarkable documentary-style reflective essay. It's titled A Spiritual Narrative Faith Like Hagar, a journey of trust, sacrifice, and divine purpose.
Written by Iman Jihad Kadar.
Right, Iman Jihad Kadar.
Which is such a fantastic piece of writing.
It really is. And our mission here is to explore the profound story of Hagar, or, Hajar, as she's known in the Islamic tradition. We're going to meticulously unpack the fascinating narrative dissonance between the biblical and the Islamic accounts of this event.
Because there's a lot of friction there.
Tons of it. And from that friction, we want to extract a radically active definition of faith, something that applies directly to anyone, anywhere who is currently navigating their own barren valley.
Yeah, and the value of Kadar's essay, I think, lies in its refusal to sanitize these texts. It really demands that we look closely at the grit of the desert, and perhaps more importantly, it requires us to observe the genuine textual differences between these ancient traditions without feeling the need to immediately apologize for them.
Right, without smoothing over the rough edges.
Exactly. We are examining the endurance of a marginalized woman who fundamentally altered the spiritual geography of the world.
Okay, let's unpack this. To truly comprehend the weight of her legacy, I think we have to establish how she actually enters the historical memory of these two monumental traditions, because the divergence in her origin story is, it's immediate and it's striking.
It really is.
Let's look at the biblical account first, specifically Genesis 16. The socio-legal context of the ancient Near East is critical here, right? Hagar is explicitly identified as an Egyptian servant. She belongs to Sarai, who later becomes Sarah. And because Sarai had been unable to bear children, the text states she gave Hagar to Abram, who we later know as Abraham, so that he could build a family through her. This wasn't a romance. It was a recognized, albeit fraught, surrogacy arrangement.
Right. It was very common in the patriarchal structures of that era. And that socio-legal framework is essential because it establishes her initial lack of agency.
She didn't really have a say.
No, not at all. In the Genesis narrative, Hagar is essentially a commodity. She's moved around the chessboard of a patriarchal household to solve a dynastic problem. Now, the Islamic tradition introduces her through a slightly different lens, a different lens of transmission.
And she's not actually named in the Quran itself.
Exactly, which might surprise some people, but she occupies a central, undeniable place in Islamic sacred memory. Her memory in the Islamic world is preserved through what are called authentic hadith.
Which, for anyone unfamiliar, what are those exactly?
So hadiths are the meticulously recorded oral traditions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. And when we say authentic, we're talking about a really rigorous historical verification process.
It's not just hearsay.
Not at all. The most prominent compiler of these is a scholar named Bukhari, whose collection, al-Bukhari, is considered by Sunni Muslims to be the most reliable book after the Quran.
Okay, got it.
So her story lives dynamically in these hadith, in the physical rites of the annual pilgrimage to Makkah, and of course, in the Genesis account. The Bukhari narration describes Hajar as having been given to Sarah after Allah protected Sarah from a tyrannical ruler. So the dynamic shifts completely. She enters Ibrahim's household as a living testament to a moment of divine protection and deliverance.
Wow. That really elevates her arrival.
It does. But, the source essay makes a very careful scholarly point here. We have to distinguish between authentic scriptural sources and later historical embellishments.
Like the stories of her being a princess.
Exactly. Later Muslim chroniclers occasionally added extra layers suggesting she was Egyptian royalty, but the core authentic hadith sources keep the focus much tighter.
It reminds me of examining an archaeological site.
Yeah.
Where two different civilizations have built structures over the exact same sacred artifact.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, if you look at the surrounding strata, like the soil composition, the artifacts scattered near the perimeter, they tell different stories about how the site was formed. Genesis paints her entry through the stark reality of ancient servitude. The Islamic tradition frames her entry through the aftermath of divine intervention against a tyrant.
But the core is the same.
Exactly. When you brush away the dirt and look at the artifact in the center, it's identical. You have a deeply vulnerable woman who enters a patriarch's household, becomes a mother, is thrust into unimaginable environmental pressure, and discovers firsthand that God preserves life.
Yes. The core remains intact, even as the narrative frameworks diverge. Both traditions recognize her as a woman stripped of conventional social power who, paradoxically, becomes the pivot point of divine action.
Right.
But as Hajar's text analyzes so brilliantly, the most fascinating textual friction doesn't lie in the preamble of how she entered the household.
No, it happens later.
Right. The true narrative dissonance emerges when mother and son are finally expelled into the wilderness.
So what does this all mean? This is the chronological puzzle that completely reframes how we read these texts. And we aren't merely talking about differing geographical coordinates. Genesis locating the expulsion of the wilderness of Beersheba and their Islamic tradition locating it in the barren valley of Makkah.
No, it's a profound discrepancy regarding the actual age of the child when they're sent away.
Yes, and this isn't based on outside commentary. This friction exists within the internal mathematics of the book of Genesis itself. Let's look at the numbers. Let's actually do the math here.
Let's do it.
Let's trace the numbers exactly as they're recorded in the text.
Okay, walk me through it.
So, Genesis 16.16 states very clearly that Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar gave birth to Ishmael.
86. Got it.
Then moving forward to Genesis 17, we are told Ishmael is circumcised at age 13. Crucially, at that 13-year mark, Isaac hasn't been born yet.
Right, because Genesis 17.21 places Isaac's birth a year later.
Exactly. And then we hit Genesis 21.5, which provides the definitive anchor. Abraham was exactly 100 years old when Isaac was born.
Okay, so the math is super rigid here. 100 minus 86 means there is exactly a 14-year age gap between the two brothers. Ishmael is 14 when Isaac is born.
Precisely. Now factor in the timing of the expulsion into the wilderness. Genesis 21.8 places the exile of Hagar and Ishmael after Isaac is weaned.
And weaning back then. What are we talking, a couple of years?
Yeah, ancient Near Eastern historical estimates for weaning generally place it around 2 to 3 years of age.
Okay, so if we take Ishmael's base, age of 14 at Isaac's birth, and we add the 2 or 3 years until Isaac is weaned,
we arrive at a concrete chronological result. Ishmael was approximately 16 or 17 years old when he and Hagar were sent into the wilderness.
16 or 17.
By the combined chronology of Genesis 16, 17, and 21, he is a young man, an adolescent. He is entirely capable of walking, carrying his own provisions, and enduring hardship on his own physical strength.
Oh, and spatially, this biblical account takes place in the wilderness of Beersheba, right?
Yes, located in the southern Levant.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because when you read the actual narrative prose of Genesis 21 in English like King James Version, the way the scene is actually described, it completely contradicts that math.
Completely.
It says Hagar is given bread and a skin of water, and the child is placed on her shoulder alongside the supplies.
Right.
And when the water runs out, she casts him under a shrub and walks away a bowshot's distance because she can't bear to watch him die.
And then God hears the voice of the lad, and the angel tells Hagar to lift him up and hold him in her hand.
I mean, the mechanical impossibility of that scene is just stark.
It really is.
You don't sling a 17-year-old over your shoulder with your luggage. You don't toss a young man under a bush, and you certainly don't get instructed to lift a teenager up and hold him in your hand.
No, you don't.
The imagery there is exclusively that of a mother physically managing and carrying a helpless infant.
This is exactly what the essay identifies as a profound internal tension. The Hebrew text supplies the very numbers that make Ishmael an adolescent. Yet its narrative prose describes him as if he were still completely dependent, right in his mother's arms.
It's a huge friction.
And it's a friction the text just carries without resolving.
It's a completely different picture.
Let me push back on this, though, just a little, or at least play devil's advocate for the sake of the translation. Is it possible that the Hebrew words used for child or lad, words like yelled or nar, were just broad terms that could encompass a teenager, and the concept of putting him on her shoulder is maybe a mistranslation of them simply walking shoulder to shoulder?
It is a fair linguistic question. I mean, nar can indeed refer to a young man or a servant, but the physical verbs surrounding the noun are what cement the dissonance.
The verbs.
Yes. She casts him under a bush. The angel tells her to lift him up and hold him in her hand. The choreography of the scene is undeniably maternal and infant-centric. If he were 17, she wouldn't need to physically lift his body and prop him up.
That makes a lot of sense.
So the chronological data built from Genesis's own numbers points in one direction, adolescence, while the emotional and descriptive prose points in entirely the opposite direction, infancy.
Which brings us to the comparative brilliance of the Bukhari account. Because in the Islamic tradition, that chronological friction simply does not exist.
It doesn't, at all. In the authentic Bukhari narration, Ishmael is unambiguously a nursing infant when Ibrahim settles them in the barren valley of Makkah.
So the text is totally internally coherent.
Exactly. The sheer, terrifying helplessness of an infant perfectly aligns with the mother's frantic, desperate search for water. When the mother's milk dries up and the baby writhes in the sand, her absolute terror makes flawless narrative sense. The narrative voice and the chronological timeline are in perfect synchronization.
And the source essay is incredibly careful to frame how we should handle this. It emphasizes that this comparative analysis is not, a weaponized attempt to declare Genesis wrong while declaring Bukhari right.
Right. We have to be careful with that.
It's an exercise in observing internal consistency. The Hebrew text provides the numbers that make him an adolescent, yet tells the story with the emotional register of a baby.
And it carries that friction without resolving it.
Exactly. While the Islamic account tells the story of an infant and maintains that reality throughout, every detail, the search, the thirst, the miraculous spring, follows naturally from that premise.
Respecting the texts means we allow them to speak for themselves. We do not have to silently merge them or erase these genuine differences to make ourselves comfortable.
Yeah. We acknowledge the friction, and yet, whether he was a boy under a shrub or an infant in the sand, there is one undeniable theme that bridges both accounts, and it is quite literally encoded into the child's name.
The name Ishmael, whether we're visualizing a teenager despairing under a shrub in Beersheba or a nursing infant writhing in the sands of Makkah, his name carries an ontological weight that is staggering.
Let's break down the Hebrew etymology, Ishmael. It translates directly to God hears, or may God hear.
It is a remarkable theological statement embedded in a human identity. If we look back at Genesis 16, before Ishmael is even conceived, Hagar is fleeing the affliction of Sarah's household. She is alone near a spring in the wilderness, terrified and marginalized.
It's just totally isolated.
And an angel of the Lord finds her, assures her she will bear a son, and explicitly commands her to name him Ishmael, giving the reason, "For the Lord has heard of your misery."
I mean, before this child can draw breath, before he can form a single syllable, his existence is a living, breathing theology. His name is a testament that human suffering doesn't just evaporate into a void, it's absorbed by the divine.
The angel explicitly commands this name because the text states, "The Lord has heard her affliction." It's not just a label, it's a prophecy. Hadar's essay notes how beautifully and symmetrically this functions within the text. Hagar is, in every earthly metric, socially powerless. She's a servant, she's geographically isolated, she's entirely uncertain of her future.
Yeah, she has nothing.
Yet the text makes a definitive, radical claim. She is never inaudible to heaven. In that Genesis 16 encounter, she responds by giving God a name in return, calling him El Roi, the God who sees me. She is heard and she is seen.
And the symmetry arrives years later in Genesis 21, right?
Exactly. When they are cast into the wilderness and the water is completely gone, what does the text say? It says, God heard the voice of the boy crying. The child, literally named God Hears, cries out, and the cosmos responds.
Wow. For you listening to this right now, I want you to sit with the gravity of that. Because theodicy, the problem of pain, the feeling of divine abandonment, is something every human wrestles with.
Absolutely everyone.
If you have ever prayed through a clenched jaw, If you've ever sat in a quiet room and wondered if your words were just bouncing off the drywall and dissipating into nothing, this specific intersection of the source material offers a quiet, resounding answer.
God hears.
It's powerful. Even when you occupy the absolute margins of society, even when you feel discarded by the structures of power around you, your voice registers in the highest chord of reality.
It is a deeply comforting, anchoring thought. But, and this is important, the essay immediately pivots here to deliver a necessary caveat.
Right, because hearing a prayer doesn't always mean immediate rescue.
Exactly. The acknowledgement of pain is not always the instantaneous removal of it. When we transition fully into the Islamic tradition's account of the barren valley, we see that Hajar's survival wasn't a matter of sitting in the sand and waiting for a miraculous airdrop.
She didn't just sit there.
No, it demanded a radical, exhausting, incredibly kinetic form of trust.
This brings us back to the Bukhari account, which, frankly, features some of the most intense, gripping dialogue in religious history. Ibrahim brings Hajar and the nursing infant Ismail to the Valley of Makkah.
And we need to be clear about the environment. Makkah at this time was not a city, it wasn't a bustling trade hub, it was a geological depression surrounded by harsh mountains.
No water, no vegetation, no human habitation.
Maximum desolation. Ibrahim leaves them with nothing more than a small leather pouch of dates and a water skin, and he turns to walk homeward. Naturally, Hajar follows him. The narration describes her trailing behind him, repeatedly asking why he's leaving them in a valley bereft of people or provisions.
And he doesn't answer. He is entirely silent.
His silence is heavy. Hajar's text warns us against the temptation to fill that silence with our own invented, comforting dialogue. We have to sit with the starkness of the narration. He does not turn around to offer false reassurances. He keeps walking. Because it is her final, piercing question that fundamentally alters the spiritual reality of that valley. She stops asking about the provisions. She asks, has Allah commanded you to do this?
Let that question echo for a second. Has Allah commanded you to do this?
When Ibrahim indicates yes, her response defines the Islamic concept of faith for eternity. She says, then he will not neglect us. Or in some translations, then he will not abandon us.
I want to dissect the anatomy of that sentence because the essay does a phenomenal job of unpacking the concept of tawakkul, the Islamic principle of absolute reliance on God. Look at the mechanism of her trust. She didn't look around and place her trust in the landscape.
The landscape was terrifying.
The landscape promised a slow, agonizing death by dehydration. She placed her trust in the one whose command stood entirely beyond the landscape.
The distinction is vital. Hajar clarifies that her declaration, he will not neglect us, was not a naive prediction of how the afternoon would unfold. She wasn't claiming the water skin would magically refill itself. She wasn't denying that her infant was going to cry. She wasn't guaranteeing that relief would arrive before she experienced the sheer terror of the situation. Her statement was a profound theological assertion. Divine wisdom can remain completely hidden to the human eye without divine mercy being absent.
It makes me think of the mechanics of aviation, specifically flying under instrument flight rules, or IFR.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Yeah, when a pilot flies into a dense, zero-visibility storm system, their inner ear and their eyes will actually lie to them. Spatial disorientation kicks in. If you trust what you see out the window, you will panic, overcorrect, and crash because all you see is gray turbulence.
You have to trust the instruments.
Exactly. In that moment, a pilot must entirely ignore their sensory environment and trust the instrument panel and the air traffic controller's radar. Hajar was flying blind through a storm of literal desert dust. She couldn't see the destination out the window, but she trusted the radar. She trusted the navigator.
That is an incredibly precise mechanism to describe tawakkul. And what's fascinating here is that the text provides a beautiful, sobering parallel to this, with Ibrahim's actions immediately following her declaration.
Right, he doesn't just walk away and forget about them.
No, he continues walking until he reaches a mountain pass where he can no longer be seen by them. He turns back toward the site of the future sacred house, raises his hands, and prays. We find the exact text of this prayer in the Quran, chapter 14, verse 37.
What does he say?
He says, Our Lord, I have settled some of my offspring in a barren valley near your sacred house. So make hearts among the people inclined toward them, and provide them with fruits that they may be grateful.
Look at the vocabulary he uses. He explicitly calls it a barren valley. He doesn't gaslight himself. He doesn't force a toxic positivity onto a lethal situation.
Exactly. Honest faith doesn't require a person to look at a desert and pretend it's a garden. He names the barrenness. He names the terrifying lack of provision by explicitly asking for fruits to be brought to a place where nothing grows.
And the essay adopts a very careful pastoral tone here, which I think is crucial for modern readers. It notes that this narrative must never be weaponized to sanctify abuse.
I am so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people hear this story and think, oh, so if someone abandons me in a toxic, dangerous situation, I'm just supposed to sit there quietly because God will magically save me. That is a dangerous misreading.
It's a fatal misreading. The text does not command individuals to remain in preventable danger or endure domestic tyranny as a test of faith. It teaches something far more specific. When a divine mandate is absolute and certain, the underlying divine wisdom can be trusted even when the horizon is empty.
Right. But trusting that radar, to use the aviation metaphor, didn't mean Hajar simply sat down in the sand, folded her hands, and waited for a rescue helicopter. What she did next completely redefines the concept of spiritual reliance.
It really shatters the illusion that faith is a passive state of being.
This is where the narrative shifts from an internal psychological state of trust into exhausting, kinetic, physical action. Because the inevitable happens. The dates are consumed. The water skin is drained to the last drop. Her breast milk diminishes in stocks. And the infant, Ismailo, begins to succumb to dehydration.
The Hadith describes him writhing, struggling in acute distress. The physical reality of watching a child die of thirst is an agony most of us cannot fathom.
She can't bear to watch him suffer. But she doesn't freeze in despair. She gets up.
She gets up. And in doing so, she redefines spiritual reliance as a verb. The narration tells us she spots Safa, the mountain nearest to her in the valley. She climbs it. She stands at the peak, scanning the horizon, desperately looking for a caravan, a traveler, anyone who might possess water.
And she sees no one.
No one. So she descends, and when she reaches the lower, flatter part of the valley where the terrain obstructs her view, she lifts the edge of her garment and runs. The text specifies she runs with the panicked urgency of a deeply distressed person.
Now,
She crosses the valley floor, reaches the opposite hill, Marwah, climbs it, and scans the horizon again.
and again, absolutely nothing. Just heat waves and rock.
Nothing. So she turns around. She repeats this grueling, desperate crossing between the two hills 7 times.
7 times. Let's think about the biomechanics and the psychology of that. Running back and forth in lethal desert heat, dehydrated herself, with the sounds of her dying infant echoing in the background. The author of our source text uses a brilliant phrase here: the dignity of faithful repetition.
It's a profound concept.
It is. True tawakkul means the internal heart relies completely on the Creator, while the physical limbs expend every ounce of lawful effort available to them. Faith is a kinetic energy, not just potential energy.
And we really need to linger on the psychological toll of the middle journeys. Think about the 4th, 5th, and 6th crossings.
The adrenaline is gone.
The adrenaline of the first run is completely gone. The physical exhaustion is setting in. And every time she climbs that hill, the horizon is just as mercilessly empty as it was the last time. The evidence of her eyes is telling her that her effort is completely futile.
For you listening, this is where ancient, dusty scripture crashes violently into the reality of your modern life. Think about the mechanics of your own repetitive struggles.
We all have them.
How many times have you sent out that 50th job application when the first 49 yielded nothing but automated rejection emails? Or you schedule yet another appointment with a specialist trying for the 6th time to get a diagnosis for chronic pain. Or you sit down to have the same excruciatingly difficult conversation to mend a fractured marriage. We are constantly climbing what feels like the exact same hill over and over, seeing no answer on the horizon, walking back down into the valley, and forcing ourselves to try again.
And Hajar's legacy offers a profound reinterpretation of that struggle. That exhausting, seemingly fruitless back and forth is not a failure of faith. It's not an indictment that God is ignoring you.
Yeah.
In fact, as Kadar points out, this seemingly hopeless repetition might be the exact crucible where your private, unglamorous anguish is transformed into the highest form of worship. Faith expressed through frantic action is not a contradiction. You rely entirely on the provider, but you aggressively utilize the earthly means provided.
You pray for the job, but you refine the resume.
Exactly. You pray for healing, but you ingest the medicine.
But human physiology has an absolute limit. 7 times across a rough desert valley under a blinding sun, eventually you hit muscle failure. Like in weightlifting, when you push against the resistance until the muscle fibers literally cannot fire another rep.
Right, the limit of human capacity.
And the growth happens at the point of complete kinetic failure. When Hajar's physical capacity is entirely spent, she literally cannot take another step. So what happens after that seventh descent? When she's emptied herself completely, how does the mercy arrive?
It happens at the absolute limit of her endurance. After the seventh crossing, the Bukhari narration tells us she hears a sound. She freezes, listens intently, and calls out, saying to whatever made the sound to help if it can.
And then?
She then sees an angel at the site of what is now the well of Zamzam. The angel strikes the earth with his heel, or in some narrations, with his wing, until water suddenly bursts upward from the dry ground.
It doesn't slowly pool, it bursts, the sheer shock of it.
Yes. And observe her reaction. Even in the face of an undeniable, staggering miracle, her instinct is immediately practical and active. She rushes toward the bursting water and begins shaping a basin with her hands, frantically scooping water into her empty skin while trying to contain the flow.
That's incredible. She scoops the water into her empty skin, calling out, Zamzam, which means to gather or stop flowing.
There is a deeply moving detail here where the Prophet Muhammad is quoted as saying, "May Allah bestow mercy on Ishmael's mother. Had she let the Zamzam flow without trying to control it, Zamzam would have been a stream flowing on the surface of the earth."
Here's where it gets really interesting. I absolutely love that inclusion. It highlights her humanity. She is witnessing a tear in the fabric of physical reality, an angel summoning water from bedrock. And her maternal instinct is still, I need to build a mud wall around this so we don't lose any. It's beautiful.
It is.
But this water didn't just serve to quench a baby's thirst for a single afternoon, did it? The sociological scale of what happens next is staggering.
It fundamentally alters the trajectory of human history in that region. The text details the immediate chain reaction. Birds, drawn by the sudden presence of water, begin to circle the valley.
And birds mean life.
Exactly. In the desert, birds mean life. A family from the Jurhum tribe, a nomadic group traveling near Makkah, spots the circling birds. They realize there must be a new, undiscovered water source. They send scouts, locate Hajar in the water, and respectfully ask for her permission to settle their families there.
And she agrees?
She agrees, but with the shrewd stipulation that she retains primary ownership and rights to the water.
This is a masterclass in the unintended, exponential scale of divine answers. Think about the irony here. Hajar was frantic, pushing her body to the brink of collapse, begging the universe for a single pouch of water, just to keep your son breathing for one more day.
Just a pouch of water.
But her kinetic, faithful action didn't just unlock a puddle. It unlocked a subterranean well that formed a community, integrated her son into the Jurhum tribe where he learned Arabic, and established a water source that has continuously sustained an entire civilization for millennia.
It perfectly illustrates that God's answers often do far more than solve the localized, immediate emergency. They tear open entirely new futures that we lack the bandwidth to even calculate in our moments of panic.
We just can't see it.
No, the essay phrases it beautifully. Mercy did not descend as a theoretical, philosophical argument to soothe her mind. It physically, violently broke through the ground. The scarcity that threatened to end a child's life became the geographical anchor around which human hearts would gather.
It serves as a reminder that when we hurl our private, unseen pain toward the divine, the collision is never meaningless, even if the meaning takes generations to unfold. But it wasn't just the physical water of Zamzam that survived the centuries. The physical water sustained a city, but Hajar's actual frantic footsteps sustained a global religion.
This is, without question, one of the most unique and breathtaking legacies in the history of world religions. In the Quran, chapter 2, verse 158, it is declared that Safa and Marwah, the two unremarkable rocky hills she ran between, are eternal symbols of Allah.
Wow.
Today, millions upon millions of pilgrims who travel to Makkah for the Hajj or Umrah pilgrimages perform a rite known as the Say. They physically traverse the exact space between those two hills, walking and jogging back and forth 7 times.
Millions of people, every single year.
Continuously. The Quranic verse does not explicitly name her, but the authentic hadith narration permanently and inextricably links this massive global ritual to her desperate, isolated search for water. Think about the sociological inversion this represents.
Right, because of who she was.
Exactly. When pilgrims arrive in Makkah, and we're talking about heads of state, billionaires, tech moguls, standing shoulder to shoulder with impoverished laborers and refugees, representing every language and ethnicity on earth, they don't retrace the majestic steps of a triumphant, conquering general. They don't walk in the path of a wealthy, ancient king.
They retrace the terrified, frantic, exhausted steps of a socially powerless, marginalized single mother who was just trying to find water for her crying baby. That is a profound sociological and spiritual statement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it permanently physically corrects any brand of spirituality that mistakes passive stillness for surrender. It mandates somatic learning with the body.
Somatic learning. That's a great way to put it.
It teaches pilgrims through the aching of their own muscles that faith is a continuous, exhausting, dynamic movement between hope and fear, between absolute dependence on the divine and executing your maximum human duty. You can't merely intellectualize it. You have to walk it and, in parts, run it to truly comprehend it.
We spend so much time trying to trap faith in our heads. We write dense theological volumes, we debate doctrine, we try to solve the equation of God intellectually, but Hajar's legacy bypasses the intellect and forces you to feel it in your calves and your lungs. It says, you want to understand the nature of trust. Walk this valley 7 times. Feel the sweat. Feel the distance.
It elevates her trauma, her panic, and her persistence into the highest possible form of sacred ritual. The essay points out that this is precisely why she is so deeply, universally honored by Muslims, even without her name explicitly appearing in the Quranic text. Her trust was transmuted into embodied perpetual remembrance.
Amazing.
But her legacy, of course, does not end with her own footsteps. The essay naturally transitions into the architectural and spiritual legacy built by the very infant she saved.
Because Ishmael doesn't just survive the afternoon. He grows up in that valley.
He grows up, he learns Arabic from the Jurhum tribe, and he is chosen as a prophet in his own right. The Quran describes him with immense respect, noting him as one who was true to his promise and someone who consistently instructed his family and his people in prayer and charity.
Yeah.
And then, years later, the narrative brings father and son back together. Ibrahim returns to the valley, and together, the two of them raise the foundations of the Kaaba, the sacred house.
The physical and spiritual focal point of Islamic prayer for over 1 billion people today.
Exactly. The Quran captures this architectural and spiritual moment in chapter 2, verses 125 through 129. As they are physically stacking the stones and raising the structure, they are engaged in a profound prayer. Our Lord, accept this from us.
That's a beautiful prayer.
And crucially, they pray for a messenger to be raised from among their own descendants who would recite the revelations, teach wisdom, and purify the people.
And Imam Jihad Qadar, the author of our source material, connects this providential intergenerational chain directly to the Prophet Muhammad.
He does. He utilizes a powerful theological metaphor describing the Prophet Muhammad as the universal cornerstone, whose eventual mission gathered this ancient, localized Abrahamic legacy and amplified it into a worldwide call. From the descendants of Ismail, the infant who nearly died of thirst, came the final messenger who summoned humanity back to the worship of the one God.
I need to interject here because while it is beautiful to look back at this sweeping historical arc, I think there's a danger in how we consume these stories. The essay issues a warning about the necessity of humility when we read this timeline, because we have the luxury of hindsight.
We do. We know how it ends.
Right. We can look at the text and see the Kaaba, we can see the millions of pilgrims, we see the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad centuries later, but Hajar did not have a crystal ball.
She was entirely blind to the historical outcome. The source is adamant that we do not project our historical omniscience onto her experience. When she was running between those hills, she didn't see a vision of the Kaaba being built.
She didn't see the Jurhum tribe coming.
Ooh, no, she certainly didn't foresee the final messenger arriving centuries later. Her reality was violently localized. She saw nothing but a barren valley, a dying baby, and the rocky incline of the next hill she had to climb.
I want to push back a little on how we interpret that blindness, because isn't it almost more terrifying that she didn't know? Human nature, our basic psychological wiring, dictates that we want God to show us the end of the story, or at least the final ROI, before we agree to participate in it.
It's very true.
If God came to me and said, I need you to suffer agonizing thirst in a desert, but I promise that in 3,000 years, billions of people will honor your name, I might be able to calculate that trade-off. I'd say, okay, the legacy is worth the pain. But she was offered zero reassurance, zero glimpse of the future.
And that right there is the terrifying brilliance of true faith. Her legacy's power is rooted exactly in that blindness. She executed the immediate, agonizing duty in front of her without demanding to see the architectural blueprints of the next 3 millennia.
Because if she knew, it wouldn't be faith.
Exactly. If she only ran because she knew she would be historically immortalized, it would cease to be faith. It would simply be a calculated transaction. She ran because her child was dying, and she trusted that her Lord was just, even when the horizon was empty. That is the essence of tawakkul.
Executing the immediate duty without demanding to see the architecture of the centuries. That is a staggering thought to carry. You don't have to build the city, you just have to climb the hill.
It is deeply humbling. And to truly understand how these towering theological themes resonate on a personal, human level, we have to look at the lens through which this essay was written.
Right, the author.
Because the text doesn't exist in an academic vacuum. It was forged by a man who has clearly navigated his own barren valleys.
The host notes provided at the end of the source material offer a really fascinating biography of the author, Imam Jihad Hajar. His life story is a journey of persistence. He was born Crispin Fede in the West Indies, raised in a traditional Roman Catholic family.
And he had quite a spiritual journey.
He did. He spent years engaged in a rigorous search for spiritual certainty, eventually converting to Sunni Islam in 1999 and later transitioning to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in 2007. He doesn't frame this evolution as a rejection of his roots, but rather as a spiritual elevation, a continuous forward movement in his search for truth.
The parallels between his personal biography and the themes he extracts from Hajar's story are striking. Professionally, he's a retired second-generation jeweler, a trade that requires meticulous, repetitive, patient work. But more significantly, he lives with dyslexia.
Wow.
He writes openly about understanding firsthand the immense challenges of learning and progressing through persistent difficulty and unseen barriers.
The dyslexia is such a perfect modern parallel to Hajar's physical persistence, isn't it? It represents an internal barrier that seems entirely insurmountable, a friction that makes every step harder than it theoretically should be.
Exactly. And yet he views his dyslexia not as a permanent, paralyzing roadblock, but as a continuous reminder that ultimate guidance and ability come from Allah, who possesses the power to open doors exactly where human limitations seem to bolt them shut.
It perfectly mirrors the theology of Zamzam, mercy bursting through an impenetrable surface.
It does. Furthermore, Hajar played a foundational role in establishing organized Muslim community life on his island. He was instrumental in creating the first dedicated space for congregational Friday prayers. He quite literally helped build a spiritual community space out of nothing.
So he basically cultivated a settlement in a spiritual barren valley, mirroring the physical settlement that formed around Zamzam.
The symmetry is undeniable, and the text shares his personal guiding motto, which serves as the perfect synthesis of his life and his essay. Destiny is written, but it is our faith, iman, and action jihad that gives it meaning.
Faith and action. That phrase perfectly encapsulates the image of Hajar running between Safa and Marwah. The heart believes, but the legs must run. It is a remarkably grounded, muscular way to perceive destiny.
It completely rejects passive fatalism.
It demands your physical, exhaustive participation in the unfolding of God's will.
Which brings us full circle to the core mission of today's deep dive. We've navigated these incredibly rich texts. We've examined the fascinating chronological friction between the biblical adolescent and the Islamic infant.
Right.
We've decoded the profound, comforting theology embedded in the name Ishmael, God hears. And we have dismantled the idea of passive faith, replacing it with the radically active nature of tawakkul. Hajar's story is the ultimate proof that honest faith can look at a lethal landscape and name the danger. You are allowed to say, "I am terrified, and this is a desert," without that honesty being construed as accusing God of neglect.
Because fundamentally, human absence and environmental barrenness do not equate to divine absence. And as we wrap this up, I want to speak directly to you, the listener. Your personal wilderness almost certainly does not look like the ancient rocky desert of Makkah.
No. As Hajar's essay beautifully outlines in its closing reflections, your barren valley takes a modern shape. Your wilderness might be an empty bank account staring back at you. It might be the 50th unanswered job application.
Or a terrifying health diagnosis.
Yes, a sudden health diagnosis that changes the trajectory of your life. It might be a house made unbearably quiet by sudden grief. Or it might simply be the exhausting reality of waking up each morning to a future that absolutely refuses to explain itself to you.
The geography changes, but the spiritual mandate remains exactly the same. Use every available earthly means. Climb the next physical or emotional hill in front of you, and place your ultimate trust in the giver, not merely in the means themselves. Do not make the mistake of assuming that your diminishing resources are proof that God's provision has been exhausted.
The silence you experience while running back and forth between your version of Safa and Marwah is not empirical proof that no answer exists. The mandate is simply to continue making the next lawful, faithful crossing.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you navigate whatever valley you find yourself in this week. If Hajar's most desperate, frantic, terrifying moment of running back and forth, the exact moment she felt the most isolated, abandoned, and powerless, if that specific moment was eventually elevated into a sacred ritual of worship repeated by billions of human beings over millennia, what if the most exhausting, repetitive, seemingly hopeless struggle you are walking through right now is actually the hidden subterranean foundation for something that will outlast you?
What a question.
What if you don't need to see the blueprint of the city that will eventually be built? What if your only job today is to just take the next hill?
That is a staggering, powerful thought to carry into the world.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the text, keep exploring the friction, and whatever barren valley you are currently walking through, keep taking that next faithful step. Keep climbing your next hill. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.